Live, second time lucky. I'm reading Many Lifetimes, a collaboration between Joan Marshall Grant and her husband Dennis Kelsey. This is the third chapter, and it is again Joan Grant speaking, the supraphysical body. Implicit in the recognition of reincarnation is the knowledge that the current personality is not only immortal, but is one of a series of personalities. But it is less generally recognized that the body, except for its outer, three-dimensional rind, is equally immortal. The body of every individual has a physical and a supraphysical component. And when the energy exchange between these two components ceases to exist, the physical body dies. But the supraphysical body does not die. It cannot die, for the simple reason that it consists of an order of matter which is not subject to the process which we call death. A process which the physical particles integrated by an energy field disintegrate, because the energy field has become inactive. The majority of misconceptions about the conditions of discarnate life have stemmed from the illusion that the only aspect of the personality which can exist independently of the physical body are those concerned with concepts and emotions. If this were so, the dead would indeed be amorphous creatures, without passion or parts, but unfortunately such apparitions exist only in the imagination or in Gothic tales. The true state of affairs is that the supraphysical body is the receptor of sensory experience on all its levels of activity, and when free of the need to operate through its physical counterpart, is infinitely more perceptive than when muffled in flesh. So the personality, whether the physical body happens to be dead or alive, awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious, always retains both form and function. The knowledge that we have bodies terrestrial and bodies celestial is by no means new. It was a common place in more enlightened civilizations, such as early dynastic Egypt, which is why the Sphinx, the body of an animal with a human head, symbolizing the dual aspects of the personality, was so often depicted in the Nile Valley. It is because dogmatists who could not accept a non-material reality confused the supraphysical with the physical body, and the concept of the resurrection of the material particles come to be crafted onto the Christian heritage. The same disastrous misbelief has caused death to assume a grotesque stature in our modern civilization. Morticians may benefit from the prevalence of necrophobia, but hundreds of thousands of individuals suffer exceedingly because their physical bodies are kept ticking over by chemical and sometimes even by mechanical means, when they are obviously ready to be shed, just as a snake sheds its outgrown skin. As though it were not bad enough to deny immortality to the more subtle aspects of the body, a further indignity was added. The body was portrayed not as the essential partner, but as the enemy of the other elements of the personality. Vast numbers of people, although paying lip service to a divine creation, were duped into denying and otherwise persecuting their bodies. This is a particular malign practice, since the body, which has become habituated to inflicting suffering on itself, is unlikely to be squeamish about inflicting suffering on the bodies of others. Unfortunately, this malign practice is still considered respectable by many otherwise sane members of society. Ritual flagellation of hair shirts are now unusual means of auto-torture, but those addicted to the same unhealthy attitude of strength through suffering can expect to be seen as heroic by the majority of their audience. To deny instead of striving to develop any of our five senses, instead of training them to be instruments through which to give and receive joy, is as misguided as would be the musician who thought he would play the piano better if he cut off one of his hands. But a pernicious process of conditioning has caused many people to feel admiration for anyone who is making himself deliberately uncomfortable. The boxer, for instance, who takes punishment until he is concussed once too often and becomes half-witted. The climber who climbs on although he risks losing fingers and toes through frostbite. The fakir on his bed of nails and the celibate in his cell. Why is there such a strong tendency to see their self-inflicted miseries as an indication of merit? The reason is simple, but not particularly flattering. It is because nearly everybody at one time or another has indulged in such futile misuse of energy. So it requires considerable and often very humbling reassessment of our ideas and a courageous mobilization of our innate honesty before we realize once and for all that there is no virtue whatsoever in seeking suffering. I've learned this by personal experience. For instance, there was an occasion when I was so careless of my body's survival that I insisted on voicing my beliefs, although I knew that by doing so I would make no dent in the wall of a dogma by which the people of that century had allowed themselves to be imprisoned. So I was burned alive, which is an exceedingly unpleasant way of being murdered. But at least no one else suffered, and the crowd found a witch burning as stimulating as a contemporary crowd finds a crash in an automobile race. However, I was not always lucky enough only to damage myself. In the 12th century I caused the handsome and healthy body, of which I was fond, to inflict gross discomfort on itself and others by donning armor and jousting with similarly deluded males. Eventually, that body died by having a poignard driven through its right eye, an episode I still remember too vividly for comfort. I think what keeps the memory so clearly defined is the shocked amazement I felt when my visor was opened, and instead of seeing the smiling face of my squire about to unbuckle my harness and help me to my feet, I saw the face of my vanquished opponent's squire, who in a moment of vengeful anguish proceeded to dispatch me. I felt even sorrier for myself shortly afterwards, for instead of being praised for my devotion to the laws of chivalry, I was told, very briskly indeed, that I would have lived far closer to the benign pattern of evolution if I had listened to the advice of my sensory experience, which had implored me to stay at home, to cultivate my garden and the love of my wife. Even among people who are fully aware that their current personality is only one of a long series, it is not unusual to find that they regard their earlier bodies as cast-off clothes, worn for a lifespan and then discarded. When I ask to explain why some bodies are born with inherent health and beauty, and others are crippled, a frequent answer is to the effect that the body is given to us either as a reward or as a punishment. But our body is not given to us. It is initiated by an earlier superphysical of our own, although not necessarily its immediate forerunner in the series. The raw material which a superphysical affects when organizing a new physical body is a fertilized ovum and its genes. A fertilized ovum has its own energy, but only sufficient to keep it alive for 2 or 3 days, unless it is adopted by a superphysical. If the superphysical has taken on this particular ovum after due forethought and by deliberate choice, it can make an efficient selection from the available genes. It is in fact choice, not chance, which has made a particular child far healthier and better looking than other siblings of the same family. The alert superphysical will also influence the mother, so that she instinctively desires the type of food the growing embryo needs. If the embryo is being distressed by her over-smoking or too many martinis, the supraphysical will probably afflict her with a distaste for them, and if this fails to abate the nuisance, many resort to giving her bouts of nausea, until she takes the hint. But if the supraphysical grabbed the first fertilized ovum, it could find, so as to scuttle back to a physical environment, it will probably make such an inept selection from the available material that the body, which results, will be far less admirable than it might have been. It is the integral, the sum total of the wisdom acquired through the whole series of personalities, who should decide which supraphysical should organize the new body, which will become the physical component of the incarnating personality. There will be an instinctive resonance between the supraphysical, which has acted as a parent to the fetus, and the incarnating individual, which is why the physical skills acquired in one particular pre-existence are usually more easily available than the skills acquired in any of the others. The supraphysical, which has been selected by the integral, will nearly always organize a fetus of its own sex. But if a supraphysical which has become split off from its integral impulsively attaches itself to a fertilized ovum, it may create a fetus of the opposite sex, with only partial success, which is the cause of certain types of sexual anomaly. For instance, a woman who has suffered many unwanted pregnancies, or who has died in terror after an abortion or childbirth, may protect herself from a repetition of such an agonizing experience in several different ways. She may make her new body infertile, or if she decides to become male, may take it either impotent or sterile, so that she will not be able to inflict similar miseries on anyone else. She may decide to be immune to sexual desires, except with a member of the same sex, whether this be male or female. This is a very common cause of homosexuality, and if it were generally recognized, not only would cure the facilitated, but the infliction of further unhappiness by ignorant critics would be avoided. Although the physical body can be affected by innumerable outside causes, such as being cured of sepsis by an antibiotic, or paralyzed by the virus of poliomyelitis, the supraphysical is very seldom affected except by causes within the personality. Therefore, a man deafened by bomb blast would retain his hearing on all other levels of reality. But a man who became deaf rather than hear the nagging voice of his wife might find the perception of his supraphysical ears also diminished, and he may remain under this self-imposed disability until he recognizes that instead of resorting to the craven device of making himself deaf, he should have caused his wife to stop bullying him, or else left her. So I finished this here, the first part of chapter 3. Happy Sunday.